4 months of work. Dozens of artists. Fixing RWBY, Volume 5. Kanpai, everyone!
Volume 5 is terrible. No, stop. You don't get it. People these days want to complain about Volume 7 and 8, and yeah, those have significant issues, but at the very least, there is something to work with there. Volume 5? Volume 5 is impressive in how absolutely trash it is from top to bottom. Every major complaint I've had with previous volumes is here. Volume 1's lack of spine, Volume 2's lack of cohesion, Volume 3's imbalance of quality, Volume 4's lack of bite, and Volume 5 brings its own additional problems in the form of utter vapidity. This is a tour de force of bad. This volume should be archived by the American Film Institute purely on the basis of how to write a story that takes up so much time and yet does so little with it. I'm going to be upfront here. Of all the seasons of Fixing RWBY, this is probably going to be the one that resembles its progenitor volume the least. Seriously, in previous volumes, I could get away with presenting core scenes wholesale with only minor tweaks to dialogue to fit changes or tweak interactions. Here, I've basically rewritten the whole volume from the ground up. Now, part of that's my own fault. I'd made some significant changes in previous volumes that have natural domino effects. That was to be expected. But the sheer scale of what I've had to change while also matching the most vital plot points, this was an effort I could hardly do alone. It took a month just to do the outline for this damned thing, and another to write it, all with the help of a small handful of sketchy huntsmen who joined me on late night calls while I was penning it. Without them, I'm sure I'd be speaking in a chthonic tongue right now, burying effigies of Miles Luna in my backyard. All of that said, I'm quite happy with the ultimate results that we've wound up with. We may have had to make some severe changes to how this volume works, but in the long run, I think it comes out of this with significantly more punch, both from the emotional side and from the lore side. As a consequence, the blasted thing is 2.5 times the length of Volume 4's rewrite and clocks in at over 100 pages. So there's a lot of Fixing RWBY to come over the next few months, prepare yourselves. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough. You've waited, I've waited, now 50 members of the Sketchy Huntsmen have waited. It's time for Fixing RWBY, Volume 5. We open on darkness, muffled sounds echoing in our ears, distant combat, screams of terror, rushing wind, and nearby explosions, all drowned by the shadows. And then, a hand emerges, wearing a partially dissolved glove layering in thick green aura. Tendrils of darkness lap at the hand, trailing dry, acidic scars in the skin before it's completely obscured again. A moment later, a face emerges, struggling against the living ink. It's Roman, panicked, angered, and scrabbling desperately to escape the haze, his limbs pulling free for a second only to be dragged back in, a new trail of scars like chemical burns etched into his body. We see that in one of his hands is his cane, and as the tendrils begin to lap at his face, he squeezes his eyes shut and pulls the trigger. The darkness around him explodes in a flash of red, and we finally cut to outside, where the griffin that had eaten him is limply flying from the airship it had been kicked into, having burst out of the side. A moment later, it explodes from the inside out, and we see Roman hurtle to the ground, his aura flickering from the slow dissolve on his body in the sheer force of the explosion in such close proximity. His cane shatters from the strain, and it can be seen that his signature coat has been almost completely devoured, leaving him in only the tattered remains of his shirt, pants, and shoes. As his hat flies off into the night, Roman sees the approaching ground below and has no time to react as his body meets it. He slams into it, his aura breaks completely, and he passes out from the shock. Moments pass before a golden glow washes beneath his eyelids. His eyes open, this time a much softer green, grayer in color. Wordlessly, he stands and he limps away from the battlefield. The camera pans down to the broken cane, and as it fades to black, we're given a title card telling us this is taking place at Beacon, 11 months prior to the current time. The camera cuts back to Roman jolting awake in an emergency shelter set up in a Vale gymnasium, one among dozens of people who have taken refuge there. He sits up and quietly takes stock of the situation, including his injuries and the people around him. With a grimace at the scar on his arm and the tattered states of his clothing, he tries to stand before realizing he's chained to the bed with handcuffs. A glint of panic crosses his face until he realizes that the people around him are either too busy taking care of the injured or too injured themselves to care about him being awake. Gritting his teeth, Roman dislocates his thumb, slips free of the handcuffs, stands up, relocates his thumb, and walks his way towards the door, through which one of the emergency workers walks, leading two at-legion guards. The worker points at Roman, and the guards waste no time moving to apprehend him. Roman scowls and moves towards the set of doors on the other side of the gym, breaking into a sprint and knocking medical equipment into the path of the men chasing him. The chase is brief, as the minute Roman gets outside into Vale Street, he's back in his element, and he vanishes into the alleyways. We see him lean against a brick wall, catching his breath as the guards incorrectly choose to follow the main thoroughfare, giving Roman his moment to breathe and fully escape. He leaves, and we transition to him arriving at an apartment door, and when he reaches for the keys, he realizes he's left them in his coat, which has now been dissolved. Rolling his eyes, he kicks open the door and walks into what is presumably a safe house apartment. Unfortunately, it's not much of a safe house anymore because one of the walls has been blown open during the attack, leaving the main room partially exposed to the street outside. Roman looks at it with defeat and moves on to what he came here to do: clean up and get a fresh set of threads. Opening the closet of the bedroom, there's a group of outfits set aside for him and a group for Neo, and he lingers looking at her side of the closet before taking his clothes and closing the door. In the bathroom, he tries the shower, only for nothing but gunk to leave the pipes. Resigned to not getting a proper shower, he changes clothes, and hears a voice, seemingly from somewhere else in the apartment. With the first word he's muttered this whole time, Roman calls out for the person, checking every corner of the place and threatening to beat them within an inch of their life if they've stolen anything. Instead, he hears noise coming from within the bathroom. Returning, he hears the voice again while looking towards the mirror. This is where he's blindsided by the bold mental proclamation of, "Hello, I'm Professor Ozpin." Roman slams himself into the wall behind him, breath rapid. He asks where the voice is coming from, and Ozpin tells him he's inside Roman's mind. Roman doesn't believe him and is quick to scour the bathroom and his clothes for hidden speakers. Finding none, Ozpin asks if he's satisfied, and of course Roman isn't. There has to be some better explanation for it. Ozpin muses that his attitude is very ungrateful for the person who saved his life, and when Roman asks, Oz explains that he was the one that took control of Roman's body and brought him to the field shelter. Roman is furious at that, since that almost ended with him getting arrested again, and Ozpin apologizes for that. He doesn't exactly have a choice of who he ends up in the mind of, and he had no way to know that he was inside of Roman's head. All he knew at the time was that his new host had passed out in the middle of a battlefield and that he was injured. Ultimately, getting arrested for a second time would have been preferable to being eaten, wouldn't it? Roman tells Oz to spend a couple of weeks locked up inside of Ironwood's prison carrier and then talk to him about what would be preferable. Ozpin turns that around on Roman by asking him to spend eternities hopping bodies with little control over what they do. For emphasis, he moves one of Roman's arms, though it's sluggish and unwieldy. Roman is horrified as his hand moves on its own accord, and he is quick to use his other hand to restrain it. Ozpin comments that that demonstration was about the peak of what he can do, and even that much is dwindling quickly as their motor functions begin to fuse. Short of Roman ceding control directly, Ozpin will be powerless to do anything with Roman's body. Roman collapses on the remains of the apartment's couch before acknowledging, with no small level of disbelief, that someone else really is in his head. Ozpin agrees that it was quite a surprise when it first happened to him, and the weight of the implications might be more so. The world is at stake from a grave threat, and Ozpin has been fighting for centuries to stop it from succeeding. Roman has the distinguished honor to be the next in a long line of hosts destined to fight that threat and keep all of Remnant safe. Ozpin notes that it could be quite an adjustment period for Roman, but he's sure that by the time they link up with Ozpin's allies, Ozpin's presence will begin to feel like second nature. Roman waves that off, saying that it's only an adjustment period so much as Oz remains in his head. He happens to enjoy the luxury of his own mind and doesn't intend to give up the real estate that's rightfully his. He doesn't know how Oz got in his head, but once he finds Neo, they'll go to a shrink or a priest or something and find a way to kick Oz out. Ozpin is actually taken aback by Roman's brazen reply and is quiet for just a moment before asserting that Roman doesn't quite understand the situation. Roman cuts Oz off, stating that there's some old fart in his head trying to tell him what to do. Extort enough corporate suits and you get to know the type. Roman explains he's just gotten out of a rather sticky business entanglement, and he's not keen on entering another one. Whenever Roman gets Ozpin out of his head, the ghost can go haunt someone else and bring his save the world nonsense with him. Ozpin replies that it doesn't work that way. There's no way for Ozpin to leave outside of Roman dying. Like it or not, they're stuck together. Roman stands and cracks his neck, commenting he's always found a way to be the exception to the rule. You don't become a criminal mastermind without a little grit, determination, and creativity. But his first priority is Neo, and in that he will not budge. Ozpin, capitulating as a show of good faith, says he'll help Roman look for his partner, and in exchange perhaps he'll humor the old man's plans. Roman approaches the door to the apartment, resting a hand on the broken handle before replying tentatively that he might listen. Might. But Oz shouldn't count on it. And with that, Roman is out the door. As that door closes, another door in Junior's bar opens, opening into the room of Melanie and Milcha Malachite. We are told this is occurring a few days later via title card. Junior is silhouetted by the light from the hallway outside, illuminating the otherwise unlit room. He offers Melanie, the only person in the room, dinner on a tray, but she quietly shifts in the sheets on her bed, effectively non-responsive to him. Junior is hesitant to leave, saying it's been a couple of days and, though it's unspoken, he's clearly deeply concerned about her. She continues to give him the silent treatment and he leaves, saying she can grab the food from the bar if she feels well enough to come get it. We follow him out to his club, which has temporarily been closed following the attack on Beacon, and he puts the food down at the end of the bar. He pulls out his scroll where an image of himself, Melanie, and Milcha are all seemingly happy together, but he can't stand to look at it very long, closing it and putting it back in his pocket. He busies himself cleaning up the glasses behind the counter when Roman walks in, interrupting the man's mindless cleaning by dropping his elbows unceremoniously onto the bar when he sits. Junior acts with only a little shock to see Roman alive, commenting that the word had gone around that the crime lord was looking for his missing partner. Roman is genial and somewhat hopeful that Junior can help him find Neo, but Junior cuts him off quickly and tells him to leave. Roman is confused, of course, but Junior is quick to explain that he doesn't want to be involved in anything or with anyone that had their hands in what happened during the fall of Beacon. Feigning indignance, Roman puts a hand to his chest, proclaiming his innocence, but Junior is quick to shoot him down, pointing out that there's not a snowball's chance in hell that's the truth. Roman was arrested for the breach months ago, and with the White Fang involved, it's clear to anyone with eyes and a brain that the same people were involved. Roman growls that he had his hands tied. He didn't want a single part of what happened, but if he hadn't complied the way he had, he would have been killed on the spot. His employers over the last half year have been exceptionally powerful. Why would Roman have even entertained the idea of getting arrested in the first place? He could have made it out of there scot-free if it hadn't been for the people pulling the strings, using him as a scapegoat. Despite the truth in Rowan's words, Junior doesn't buy it, and he wants no part in any of it. Things happened during the fall that, well, he trails off, but it's clear whatever happened was traumatizing. He suggests it would be for the best if Roman leaves. Insulted, Roman does. However, during the whole conversation, the two had an eavesdropper, Melanie, who'd come out of her room to get some of the food that Junior had talked about. She was privy to the whole conversation, and as Roman leaves, she slinks back to her own room. Outside, with Roman, Ozpin speaks up, commenting on Roman's lack of success. Roman snaps back at him to shut up. He's running out of ties that haven't been burned when he enacted his last big heist during Volume 1, and the running commentary from some stupid voice in his head isn't helping his growing sense of frustration. Ozpin apologizes, but he's trying to keep Roman's head on straight so they can be as efficient as possible. They've already been at this several days and there's been zero progress made. He then goes on to suggest that if none of his old contacts could help and the police would arrest him on the spot, it may be time to start investigating morgues. Roman snarls quietly at the suggestion, stealing his face and walking towards the sidewalk. Ozpin tries to soften the statement that humanity is mortal and death is ever present. It comes to everyone, and if it was Neo's time, it was her time, and he should be thankful for what time he had with her. Roman bites back at Ozpin's words, that Neo is made of tougher stuff than Oz could ever comprehend. A stupid fall wouldn't kill her, and a few setbacks won't stop Roman from continuing to search for her. Ozpin asks where they're headed, and Roman says that he still has a few more contacts to dig up. Some burned bridges can still be crossed with enough rope and resolve. We jump back to Melanie in her room, yelling to Milcha about what she overheard, about how Roman was involved with the people responsible for the fall of Beacon and all the damage that spread into Vale. Milcha takes the ranting in stride and offers words of affirmation to Melanie. Of course it's his fault. Doesn't she remember that the blonde bimbo who came to the bar used him as leverage against Junior? And how that ended with the whole club wrecked? The man is nothing but trouble. It's only natural he be involved with the fall. Melanie, still wholly distraught, asks what they can do. The authorities are too preoccupied with the attack to focus on him, and the underworld wants to lay low. With a smile, Milcha suggests that they take care of him themselves, get back what he and the rest of his cabal took from them, and live happily ever after with his head hanging as the club's centerpiece. As Milcha speaks, Melanie begins to nod her head in agreement, and when the camera spins around Melanie, we see that Milcha isn't actually there. She's only a product of Melanie's mind. Junior knocks on her door and asks if everything's alright. He heard shouting. Malachite looks to the door and says that everything is fine. In fact, Milcha and I were thinking it was just about time we come out for some fresh air. A title card tells us more days have passed, and we pick up with Roman and Ozpin at a morgue. We can tell the situation has deteriorated. Roman is quite clearly not operating on a healthy amount of sleep anymore, and Ozpin's voice is twinged with irritation over how long the search is taking. He prods Roman into giving up the search. There are more important things to be done. Roman sees that there is nothing more important to him, and if she's not a corpse, then it means they didn't check hard enough with his contacts, didn't dig deep enough. As he leaves the morgue and enters a nearby alley, he resolves to hit up his contacts at the docks. Maybe Neo made her way out of the city, though he doesn't know why she'd do that unless she had to. It is here that a second figure follows Roman into the alley and calls out his name in a scratchy, hoarse, and prolonged way. Roman turns to face the deranged smile of Malachite, wearing a crude combination of the two sisters' clothing, a blade on her right arm and a blade on her left leg. She begins to approach, dragging her arm blade across the alley wall. Roman flounders over both the twins' names, unsure of which twin this is, and Malachite screams that he's not allowed to use their names with all that he took from them. He's honestly confused what the hell is happening, and says as much, but that doesn't stop Malachite from attacking him full force. And here we get our first action sequence of the volume as Roman is chased through Vale streets, scrambling to defend himself and keep himself ahead of Malachite's vicious, if not sometimes horribly uncoordinated and unbalanced attacks. Eventually, he's chased to Vale's harbor where he finds himself cornered between Water, Malachite, and a nearby group of Legion soldiers. Roman flees across the docks, across the boats, with Malachite in hot pursuit, slashing and gouging her way across the yachts and fishing skiffs. With a stroke of luck, Roman manages to jump from a sail onto a much larger boat leaving out of the docks, leaving Malachite to fall into the waters beside it. Roman collapses from exhaustion against the rails of the boat and watches the port fade into the distance. For her part, Malachite crawls up onto the dock, using her blades to give her extra leverage into the wood. She watches as Roman shrinks into the horizon on the ship and gives a blood-curdling, furious scream. We cut to black and hit the opening for the volume. Wait, why am I doing this now?
この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。ご支援者様のお名前は動画の途中で記載されます。
Episode 2 opens similar to how the original Episode 1 does, with darkness and Nora excitedly demanding that everyone hurry up. The darkness eases up so we can see our heroes approaching the tunnel's end. We can tell from their slouched poise and heavy bags under everyone's eyes that they're just now really getting out of bed for the day, and they're all exhausted. John asks Nora to settle down, but Ruby yawns while waving him off. She's just as excited to see the city proper as Nora. Nora just has the most energy of everyone in general. Ren adds, looking just as tired as John, that Mistral is a wonderful sight, and he's sure that it'll lift their spirits after they've all been stuck in a house for an entire day. Qrow backs this up from the literal back of the group by saying the city's a real sight to see. Ahead of them, Nora has already exited out onto the veranda and is calling them all forward. With a flourish of his arm, Qrow properly introduces the team to
the city of Mistral.
The group emerge onto a balcony overlooking the expansive interior of Mistral's dual mountain structure. Buildings litter the mountainside, spreading vertically, horizontally, in every which way they can in order to cram space. The The top of the mountains are capped by a massive bridge-like structure that supports a number of buildings, referred to as the Cho-Chin by the characters, and though unseen here, the Cho-Chin is topped by Haven Academy and the city CCT Tower. Waterfalls cascade from the highest levels of the mountain and the Cho-Chin, spilling through the heart of the city. Shops and houses pocket the ridge, entire centers of commerce connected by bridges between the two mountainsides, all showered with the spray from the waterfalls. The water all trickles down into the bottom of the city, where a mixture of urban sprawl and overgrown wetland have merged together into a veritable swamp where the walls of one building blur into the trees of the house next door. All of this is tethered together by a series of pipes that are all well maintained near the top of the mountain and deteriorate more and more as they descend into the urban swamps below, ending in crude stonework aqueducts that peek out from around the foliage and buildings. Ruby and John are in awe of this sight, while Qrow just lays his hand on Ruby's head. Softest yet is the expression of Nora, who is sitting on the balcony's ledge, admiring the view and holding Ren's hand as they overlook the city. Qrow asks if it was worth the wait, and John says that it's nice, but it could have been worth an even longer wait, motioning to the fresh bandage around Qrow's waist. Qrow waves them off, saying that the poison's almost completely out of his system, even motioning to his flask. "See this, kid? All-in-one painkiller and disinfectant," before taking a sip. John and Ruby look unamused, but Nora quickly pulls them out of their reprieve, eager to get up to the Cho-Chin. Her and Ren have never had the chance to go all the way up there until now. As they enter one of the many glass elevators that pocket the mountain, Qrow tells her to temper her expectations till they're done at Haven. Seeing Lionheart is the first priority. With that, they board the elevator and take off. The elevator emerges to the top of the Cho-Chin, where Haven's clean, aesthetically pleasing campus awaits the crew. Things are quiet, however, and the crew are unsettled, standing on edge until they arrive at Leo's office. He's actually just leaving it, staring at his watch in concern as he bumbles out the door and into Qrow. There's a brief surprise for all parties, and Ranger even reaches for their weapons, but no one draws them and no one falls on the ground. We're keeping the slapstick to a minimum for now. Leo, dusting himself off from the run-in, apologizes, explaining that time got the better of him and he forgot to meet them out in the courtyard. Qrow is quick to forgive it, though he's steelier about the lack of people on campus, asking where all the teachers and students are. Leo replies that they're out on missions at Current, all of them. It'll be easier to explain if everyone gets situated in his office, though. So, the group crowd in and Leo begins to explain. Mistral has been in a state of disarray since the fall of Beacon, with initial panic in the streets bringing a significant number of Grimm to the city's border. Those were repelled, and order was somewhat restored, but the outward normality of everyday life hasn't tamed the unease in the hearts of the people. Grimm attacks have been up, and growing worse, to the point that the Council made the hard decision to nationalize the Huntsman missions to better fend off the threat. Ruby speaks up, asking if that's why they pulled back support for the railway and couldn't send them an airship. This is the first time we see Leo really hesitate to respond, a brief flash of guilt on his face before he says that yes, there was a severely bad fight out at Kuchinashi that severely strained their resources. Sending a simple medevac when Qrow was injured was the best he could do even after that particular crisis had receded. The Grimm have been relentless. Qrow pinches his nose and asks where the students are if that's the case, and Leo explains that someone had to start taking care of the private Huntsman missions being put out on the boards. Qrow slams his hands on the desk, asking what Leo means by that. Leo says that the pragmatic solution was to make the students take on everyday complaints so that the people of Mistral aren't suffering while the trained huntsmen are busy. It serves as a good learning experience about real huntsman work and solves the demand in the marketplace in one go. Qrow is taken aback, saying that there are missions on those boards that students couldn't possibly handle. Hell, there are criminals on those boards, and kids have no practical way of knowing what missions to take and not take. He's thrown children to the wolves. Leo hardens his expression and stance, saying, "As much as I would love to go gallivanting around the countryside, Qrow, I have an entire city to manage, half the population of which already hate my guts. Unlike you, I can't shirk my position and lapse into unemployment. People are depending on my decisions to keep them safe, and if it means those who have pledged to protect our world make that sacrifice early, then so be it." Qrow raises his hands in the air and growls about how great the situation is. A school without any teachers or students, absolutely wonderful. Then who, he asks, is guarding the relic? Just little old retired Lionheart? Leo takes indignance to that, puffing out his chest that he's not too old he can't fight. Besides, Osman's idea of security is laughable. The vault already needs the spring maiden to open. Everything else around that is just redundancy. And it isn't just him. Students are still frequently on campus, they're just busier than normal. A quiet campus isn't a deserted one. Qrow says that the redundancy is vital when John asks what Lionheart is talking about. Realizing the discussion had gotten far more heated than he intended, Lionheart straightens up and asks how much Qrow let them in on. Qrow says he hit most of the important parts, and he'd have told them more if he hadn't been, well, you know, motioning to the bandage at his waist. He turns to the kids and explains that only maidens can open the vaults where the relics are stored. Pointedly, he turns to Leo and sees that they are supposed to be the last line of defense protecting the relics, but Lionheart stands strong against the glare. Leo continues that only the Spring Maiden can open the Mistral Vault, and she vanished years ago, running away from her duty decades prior. But it's clear she didn't defect either, or else they'd already have her kicking down their door. Which is why we have teachers to guard it, just in case, Qrow grouses, crossing his arms. Before Lionheart can retort though, he rolls his eyes. He brushes by his own point, sick of the argument, and says that he might actually know why that is. He had a chat with Raven before he linked up with the kids, and he's pretty sure the maiden fled to the Branwen tribe. RWBY steps in, asking, Yang's mom? One and the same, Qrow replies. With the kind of damage the tribe has been wrecking recently, most notably Xion, they have to have a maiden backing their plays, and Raven all but confirmed it when they talked. The only problem Qrow sees now is finding where the Branwen tribe is and convincing the maiden to join the Yellow Brick Bunch. Fortunately for them, Qrow knows the tribe's habits. Unfortunately for them, Raven knows he's onto them, and the usual hunts haven't panned out from what he could see. He's sure he can find them, but it's going to take some digging. After that, it's just a matter of scrounging up enough willing huntsmen to assist in case talking with Raven goes south, and they'll be golden. Leo's not keen on that idea either, since Mistral needs every huntsman it can right now. Even if they get lucky, and there's a pocket of time where the Grimm are easier to deal with, there's uneasy political tensions between Mistral and Atlas, what with the trade embargo going into effect. They won't feel it immediately, but the squeeze on imported dust is going to make the people of Mistral quite distressed. There's even talk of starting war with Atlas, to reopen the dust flow by right of conquest and bolster the spirits of the populace once and for all behind a jingoistic cause. Ren balks at the idea of open war, and Nora helpfully chimes in that yeah, that's a bad idea, remember the last major war? Ended bad for everyone! Lionheart agrees, saying that an attack on Atlas is suicidal for Mistral, but Beacon's fall and Vale's absence from the political stage have made the international scene an absolute mess. Qrow asks about any leads they have in the other direction, the infiltrators from Mistral during the Vital Festival. Leo shakes his head. Cinder and Emerald were unknown quantities with clean transcripts coming in, and though Mercury's father was a known assassin, the combat academies have seen their fair share of bad seeds turn good. But the fact that Cinder managed to worm her way onto the faculty without a problem contributed to his vote in the council nationalizing the Huntsman. His trust in his own subordinates had been shaken thoroughly. Regardless, their personal effects on the campus have already been searched and nothing of use could be found. It's as if they vanished into the wind. At this rate, the best course of action would be to find the Spring Maiden and find a way to get her as far from Mistral as possible. Qrow sighs and says that they can start looking into where Raven and the gang might be, but he's adamant that Leo start looking into bolstering the school with some kind of security. Leo promises to do what he can with his limited free time, but there's only so much he can do at this rate and so few people he can trust. Qrow agrees that those seem to be in short supply before waving the kids out of the room. They give warm goodbyes to Leo, which only seem to make him feel more guilty. With the door closed, he collapses onto his chair and Watts' logo appears as a hologram over his desk, chiding him for his flimsy acting ability. In the hall, Ranger discuss how they should go about investigating for clues to the Branwen camp location, and Qrow just tells them to leave it to him. The four of them have been through enough as it is for the last few weeks. They deserve a little time off. When they ask what he'll be doing, he just waves them off and says he'll be self-medicating in a local dive. RWBY watches, concerned as he pulls away from them towards the elevator. John asks if he's going to be okay, and RWBY says that she doesn't know. Nora jumps between their shoulders and says that he'll be fine. Besides, hey, they have the house all to themselves until he gets home, and that means slumber party! John refuses since they've been backpacking for weeks together at this rate, and during this debate, a curious pair of shoes come into focus further down the campus. The feet approach and call out to them, and the camera lifts to show Arslan Atlan, as well as Scarlet and Sage, all three of which look tired and bedraggled. Greetings with Scarlet and Sage are amenable, what with cracks about Sun taking off, and well wishes that Neptune's recovery is going well back in Patch. They're also quick to explain they're only popping onto campus between missions. They've been run ragged, and this will be their only night on campus for a whole month provided the schedule stays steady. They were just on their way from the dorms to the onsen in the Chochin's Mall when they ran into each other, and Sage recommends if they get the chance to check it out. It's super relaxing. Arslan's greeting is quieter and reserved, looking on John, Nora, and Ren with some amount of pity, sadness, and regret. Pyrrha's death lingers heavily over the whole conversation. Arslan expresses regret that the last time they all worked together it wasn't under better circumstances, and that they have to meet with just as unpleasant circumstances as well. John agrees, but it's nice to know that Team Auburn made it home safely. Arslan just seems to nod through that concern and finally asks if they know who did it. Surprisingly, RWBY butts in, answering with Cinder's name, and Nora adds, confidently and with no small hints of rage, that they'll get the people responsible for what happened. Arslan responds, half playfully, half seriously, only if she doesn't get to those people first. They took away her chance to rematch Pyrrha ever again. They better watch out for the real Mistralian champion coming their way. Before this could accidentally come off as more of an insult towards Pyrrha, Ren, and Nora, Scarlet rolls his eyes and grabs her by the elbow, telling her to tone down the machismo. He says that as much as he'd love to chat with the crew, they really need to get going. The rest of Auburn are already there at the hot springs, and they're probably waiting for them. The group say their goodbyes and hope they run into each other again soon, then ultimately part ways. Nora caps the scene by bringing back up the idea of a slumber party as they get into the elevator. As the elevator descends, we far outpace it with the camera and transition into the slums of Mistral to a storefront called The Chop Shop, and the attached apartment building beside it. Presumably a vehicle repair company, we quickly learn it serves as a front for a White Fang base, as well as a workshop for Watts, slaving on a scroll while seated at a workbench. He pulls up the soldering goggles to admire his work before speaking to a different active scroll beside him. On the other end is Leo, who is asking if it'll be hard to find the Branwen tribe. Watts says that it'll take some time no doubt, but Salem has reinforcements on the way to the city proper in order to do more groundwork. Once they're here, he has faith that they'll be able to at very least outpace Qrow in his children's investigation, if only by a slim margin. It's clear in his inflection he doesn't have a high opinion of the reinforcements in question. When Leo asks how the White Fang are doing, Watts replies that they're doing quite well by his understanding, and when he's done with these modified scrolls, they'll be unstoppable. He lifts the scroll and activates it, checking its signal to make sure it's strong before saying, "Oh, I'm sure the city will be in for quite the surprise indeed." We transition through the glass screen and into the glass arboretum of the house Ranger is staying at, which from now on I'll call the Oz House because it's the house Ozpin would use while in the city. This factoid will be brought up in incidental conversation, but I'm sick of referring to it as just the house. Nora is towering over the rest of Ranger, proudly holding her game piece high and boasting about her victory. Ren comments that it's only turn 1 and she's quick to shush him before rolling the dice. John replies that she's won the last 3 games, no reason she won't win this one, and RWBY is quick to point out that she only won the second game because Nora tried to eat John's game piece. There's a knock at the door, and when they ask who it is, a muffled voice asks if this is where he can find Team Ranger. They hesitantly tell him that he's in the right place, and RWBY goes to answer the door. She opens it to find someone carrying a drunk, giggling Qrow, who's blabbing about finding him and "I did it." RWBY, seeing her uncle in such a state, sighs and thanks the stranger, motioning John to come over and take Qrow to the couch. However, when they lift Qrow off the man, his and RWBY's eyes meet, revealing Roman Torchwick. The two freeze and stare at each other. Roman just mutters a confused, "Red?" before the scene cuts to black. Oh wow, quite the cliffhanger on only the second episode. People are going to really want that resolved super quick, I imagine. It'd be a shame if someone were to delay the resolution by talking about his Patreon. So anyway, there's a few people I've really needed to give a shout out to. These wonderful new patrons. All my love goes out to Password III, Dex Nadala, Taz, Cameron Halsey, Lord Omega, Stone Davis, Isaiah Gomez, Mika Wind, Sean Resendez, Janice Heilman, Paul Thomas, No Name, Greater Bar Darkon, Miles Saxton, Necrotaret, Mediocre Dan, The Mint, Narotaro, RG0812, Opalte, Justice Mays Anderson, The Anime Guy, Mars Rover, and Mel. I apologize for how long it took to get your names out there, guys. These videos just keep getting longer and longer to make. I really appreciate your patience. That said, I'd also like to give a loving shout out to all of my other patrons as well. Remember that for $1 or more to my Patreon, you get access to the Team Frostbite Discord server, The Tundra, where myself, FatmanFalling, Dashy Lee, and other popular RWBY community members like the Sketchy Huntsman are regularly active. I'd love to see you guys in there and have you all attend some of our regular activities in there, such as Bad Fanfiction Night every Friday night that I host. With all that out of the way, I return you to your regularly scheduled fixing. Episode 3 picks up with Weiss on her way to Mistral. This scene is basically unchanged from the original, with the caveat that the airship she's stowing away on is not a flying dumpster in design. Instead, Weiss is riding in the world-class luxury of an Atlas military cargo ship, which more or less matches the aesthetic of Atlas technology and resembles a C-130 Hercules. This makes it slightly less maneuverable than the flying UPS van, but way more appealing aesthetically, and instead of having a sound mixer, it has actual flight controls. But yeah, other than that, the scene goes on normally. There's mentions of congested airspace around northern Anima from Pilot Boy, the distress signal from a nearby ship being attacked by Grimm, Weiss wanting to go save them, and Pilot Boy shutting her down hard. Weiss stares forlornly out the cockpit window, seeing a storm on the horizon, and we hard cut to a different storm above Menagerie, as the first of the spring monsoons hits the city of Qrow. We pan down to find Blake, exhausted, in ankle-deep water just outside the city walls. The wall itself is made of a heavy wooden frame reinforcing large sarsens, capped with aged gun turrets for aerial defenses. She's fending off the remains of a small pack of Beowulfs, periodically calling back the Sun and the other guards who are busy building sandbag barriers around the wooden gate to keep water out of the city, as well as other workers bucketing water out before they close the gate for the season. Soon enough, Sun and the other guards finish with the sandbags, closing the door. Blake finishes off all but 2 of the Beowulfs, using Gamble Shroud to escape up the side of the wall, while floodwaters sweep the 2 Grimm away with a comical little ARF sound as they flow downstream. Blake braces herself against the city wall while Sun walks up beside her and says she really swept them off their feet, didn't she? Blake gives a glare that only a wet cat can. Sun backpedals, but only slightly, defending his need to inject some levity in things. He promises to be the one outside the wall next time, and Blake throws her soaked hood at him before snickering at his disgruntled face. We transition over to the police station where the 2 grab towels to dry off, and Sun asks if they're going to take another shot at interrogating the White Fang members in custody again tonight. Blake says yes, but she's not sure how much they'll get out of them. They've all been incredibly tight-lipped. Well, except Ilya and Corsic, but one was just a pawn to the leadership and the other won't shut up about things that don't matter. I swear, she says, be easier to talk with these people if they were mute. So then we cut over to Mistral, where we hear Yang complaining with no small amount of disbelief, how could you get us lost? We get a little more perspective where the 2 of them have stopped beside the walls of Oniyuri, and Neo seems genuinely remorseful and shamed as she quickly signs to Yang that she's not good at reading maps. Yang sighs and grabs her face, groaning that it really shouldn't be that hard. Neo puffs her cheeks out and waves the paper in Yang's face, signing that there's a lot going on with the map, and it's really hard to read while holding onto a moving motorcycle. Yang takes the map from Neo and walks beside her, folding it in her hands to look at just the local area. On the back of it, we can see a number of circled sites crossed off. Yang points to a spot and says, look, here, we can get back on track at this town called Qrow? Whatever, we can get back on track there and make it before sundown. Neo nods at the suggestion and Yang challenges her to memorize the route before they get back to it. She'll do the same, but she wants an extra set of eyes on this one. Yang makes a casual remark that she never thought she'd find someone worse at maps than RWBY, and Neo pouts, signing, at least I'm a better fighter. Yang raises a brow and challenges that, asking when the last time she fought RWBY was. Neo raises her hands to speak, only to put them back down, repeating this a couple of times as she decides to word things better, ultimately settling on saying that RWBY cheated. Yang folds her arms and nods, smug knowing that RWBY bested Neo, and Neo just stamps her foot that RWBY didn't fight fair. Yang asks when Neo ever fought fair, and Neo brushes back a lock of hair, signing that she always gives her opponents a fighting chance, just not the most balanced chance. She should just ask the last 3 bandit tribes they ran into. Yang rolls her eyes and says that there's a stream nearby and she's going to fill up their canteens. Neo should have that map memorized by the time she gets back. Neo sends her off with a raspberry. As Yang walks past the entrance to Oniyuri, she slows down and looks into the desolate settlement, and in the background we hear rising white noise, as the settlement begins to blur and overlay with Beacon Cafeteria. Before it can consume her, she blinks out of it, shakes her head, and continues her way towards the stream. We hear an echo of Blake's scream when she got stabbed, overlay with Blake's frustrated groan, as we cut back to the Qrow guard precinct where Blake is frustrated with interrogating the prisoners. In front of her is Trifa, who gives Blake an absent stare. Blake slams her hand on the table and orders a change of prisoner. Trifa gives Blake a smirk before we cut to Yuma being brought into the room. He obnoxiously asks to see his lawyer, smug grin on his face the whole time. Blake says that he's a terrorist, he doesn't get a lawyer. He leans back in his chair and asks if that means she wouldn't get a lawyer either if she were in his place. Blake twitches at the barb, and he continues to say that they still haven't read him his rights, so they have to let him go by law, right? Don't want your citizenry getting mad at prolonged detainment, do you? Biting her tongue, she orders him away and calls for Corsic. However, when Corsic is led to the doorway, Blake takes one glance at the wild look in his eyes and orders him back to his cell, saying that she wants to see Ilya instead. Ilya is sat down in the chair, and across from her, Blake has her head in her hands, groaning. Ilya asks if interrogations are going well, to which Blake groans more. Ilya leans forward and rests her hands in front of Blake, saying she wishes she could do more to help. Blake hesitantly pats Ilya's chained wrist, saying that Ilya seems to be the only sane member of the White Fang left. For all the good that's doing you, Ilya jokes. Blake admits she doesn't have anything to ask Ilya since she's already given up all she can. It's just nice to hear a friendly voice in a cavalcade of crazy people. Ilya narrows her eyes and reminds Blake that those people are her colleagues. Trifa and Yuma are genuinely friends of hers. Friends, huh? Blake pulls away from Ilya and wonders briefly if she'd have been more like Ilya or if she'd be more like them if she hadn't left the White Fang. What would have happened if she had stayed? Ilya says Blake wouldn't have set her house on fire, and Blake blushes from that, saying Ilya didn't make things easy on her. Ilya laughs, but it peters out, and she says that as much as he tries to imagine Blake back in the White Fang, she can't see it. Every time she does, she only sees the old Blake she thought she knew, not this Blake in front of her. And if that Blake was inside of her the whole time, it'd probably have been impossible for her to stay in the Fang at all. Blake takes those words to heart and thanks Ilya, sending her back to her cell. Blake and Sun link up on their way back to the lockers, and she starts a small conversation about how poorly the interrogations are going. They're making zero progress, and today was the last day they'd have carte blanche to interview them. The new captain of the guard is being appointed today by the Elder Council, and word has it that a White Fang sympathizer is the likeliest candidate. Blake scowls at the idea of fighting corruption from the inside again, and they round the corner where they see a news report airing from the town hall of Qrow. Qrow is mid-speech, and while it sounds like normal politician pleasantries at first, he mentions that he has elected to not heed the council's decision and made an executive choice for leader of the Qrow Guard and Menagerie Militia. He steps aside and declares that Kelly Belladonna will be made the new captain in Saber Rodencha's stead. Blake, Sun, the precinct, and the universe stare in shock as Kelly steps on stage and evolves from Cat Mom to Cop Cat Mom. The scene goes dark, and the episode ends. Rolling into episode 4, we pick up with Ranger meeting Roman. There is a collective freeze as all members of the room stare at each other, unsure of what to do, everyone clearly confused as to what is going on. This doesn't last forever, however, and Nora is the first to react, grabbing the table, spilling its contents, and full-on chucking it at the open door. Roman narrowly dodges out of the way, and as he still registers that it was, indeed, an entire table that was just flung at him, RWBY slams the other door in his face and tells the crew to get their weapons. What follows is a quick slapstick mini-action scene as Roman tries desperately to explain himself and Team Ranger constantly misconstruing his intentions, making them even more violent towards him. During this engagement, Qrow is practically useless, juggled by John in a drunken stupor. Finally, the fight concludes with Roman tied up, Nora raising the table over his head in order to cave it in, and Qrow finally burbling out that Roman is in fact Ozpin, before face planting on the floor. Everyone freezes, and the restrained Roman sighs, saying that there is a lot to explain. We cut to Roman, still tied up on the couch, seated in front of the now repositioned table, with the entire crew surrounding it, all clearly distrustful of him. Qrow is on the opposite couch, being nursed back to sobriety by Ren by helping him down a glass of water. Roman acknowledges that he likes this about as much as they do. If he had a choice, he'd still be in Vale, but fate apparently has a way of screwing everyone over. The quartet expresses their doubts, with Nora saying they don't exactly believe him except for Qrow's words. And as you can probably tell, that's on shaky ground right now. Roman admits that being vouched for by a lush isn't the most ideal situation, but it wouldn't be the first time and he's confident it won't be the last. Ranger look at him, their doubt only growing, and we hear Ozpin speaking to Roman in his head, suggesting that he take over to give proper explanations. Roman argues against it, not keen to hand over autonomy so easily. And for a brief second we get a camera shift to show Ranger staring at him with added distrust as he argues with himself. Ultimately, Ozpin makes the point that he knows exactly how to win them over, and it will only work if it's in his unique cadence. Roman pinches his nose with his tethered hands, then points to the kids saying, "Just remember, I'm still here, and I will be listening." Closing his eyes, Roman gives control over to Ozpin, though without any weird glowing flourish, since we've not really seen that effect ever again throughout the original series. Ozpin amicably greets the team, and while the mood eases somewhat, their doubts linger. Ozpin dispels it completely by looking RWBY in the eye and asking if she remembers the first thing he ever said to her, then repeating verbatim his remark about her eyes. RWBY is taken aback, but then he follows that up by saying his "I have made more mistakes" speech, and she remarks with some amazement that she genuinely believes that they're talking to Ozpin. It takes a moment to register, and once it does, Nora is ecstatic, suggesting they take him to Lionheart so they can get everyone on the same page. Qrow, surprisingly, speaks up through a slowly onsetting hangover, saying that it might not be the best of ideas. Ozpin elaborates that while his return is a good thing, Leo's loyalty is only matched by his more ineloquent nature. Ren asks if they don't trust Leo, and Ozpin refutes that, saying that the man simply has loose lips. Essentially, Oz is afraid that Leo will accidentally out Ozpin's return to the Council, who are more prone to corruption, and thus spoil a significant advantage their coalition now has. While their enemies are aware of Ozpin's ability to hop bodies, to whom is always in question, and oftentimes it has been someone less formidable or able to freely travel. Thus, being reincarnated into Roman and linking up with allies so quickly is a boon they shouldn't be eager to spoil. John speaks up, questioning how exactly the reincarnation works, and why would he choose Roman of all people. Ozpin explains that he doesn't get a choice. Reincarnation like his can be seen as a gift, but in reality, it's a curse from the gods themselves. A decree that he walk the earth for all time to ensure the relics bestowed to humanity remain separate. Like the seasons themselves cannot happen all at once, all 4 relics cannot be in the same place at the same time, else doom will befall the world. The room is silent as the weight of his words land, and RWBY, resolute, steps up and asks what they need to do. Ozpin smiles and says that they've already got a fairly good plan ahead of them. Locate the Spring Maiden and the Branwen tribe, convince her, either by carrot or by stick if necessary, to rejoin the cause, and get her as far away from Mistral as possible to ensure the vault remains sealed. As for tonight, they should continue to rest. They can hit the investigation once everyone's fully recovered. Eyes of course turn to Qrow, who winces in pain from a slowly growing headache. There's only a bit of quiet before RWBY asks what they'll do with Roman. Ozpin gives her a sheepish smile, saying that while Roman certainly has a disagreeable temperament, he's agreed to humor Ozpin's mission, so far as to not actively harm any of Ozpin's conspirators or plans. Even after all these months, they still don't quite see eye to eye, but they're in an agreeable position for the time being, and the crew should learn to tolerate his presence as a tag-along, if not a full member of the team. Ozpin remarks that he's probably already overstayed his welcome, and says that he's always there, if not easily reached or heard. Closing his eyes, Roman returns to awareness. Roman blinks and mutters under his breath, "Agreeable position, my ass," before turning to the group and elaborating that he thought being pestered 15 times a day about Ozpin's noble quest would be tolerable. But Ozpin has proven to be painfully more persistent than his own conscience, and he was starting to lose sleep. John raises a brow and asks how that little factoid would endear him to them, and Roman pauses for a moment before shrugging and saying, "I was just being honest." Roman stands and looks around the living room before asking which way it is to his room. He needs to get some shut-eye. We cut to Weiss waking up in the main hold of the cargo airship, buckled into one of the many seats along the side. She gets up and goes to the front, and we have our pleasant conversation with Pilot Boy about the floating islands over Lake Matsu, and in addition to this scene we have an overlay map in the cockpit showing us that Lake Matsu is the big old lake in the dead center of Anima. They get alerted a little too late to the Mistral airship under attack by Lancers, and what precedes is roughly the same action sequence as what we see in the show. There are some noticeable changes though, aside from just another passive animation cleanup to catch flaws. One, since the airship is a much larger size, it is equally less maneuverable, and each turn, twist, and pitch should be felt in the viewer's stomach via animation and sound design. The second big change is to the Lancers themselves. There are more of them, but these are Grimm adapted to fight aircraft, maneuverable, fast, and small, in order to shear entire hulks of metal from the hull with 1,000 cuts. With a veritable swarm chasing the airship, Weiss needs to go all out on them, and thankfully the dust in the back of the ship helps that happen, with her becoming a rapid-fire anti-aircraft battery raining hell out the back of the ship, not this podunk tiddlywinks low-energy pop gun we see in the canon show. This is so intense, in fact, that Myrtanaster actually glows bright red from overuse. This is the first major fight of the volume. We gotta send the people home awed. The final change to this comes partway through the fight when all the Lancers have been dispersed. The ship's movement through the rocks awaken a full-sized Nevermore, which replaces the Queen Lancer from the final segment. The Nevermore serves as a more thematic representation of Weiss's growth, able to solo one, as well as a swarm of other Grimm, and having the Nevermore as a summon will lead to more interesting opportunities in the future. I honestly don't know who might be attached to the Lancer Queen, but since Weiss can adjust the size of her summons, she'll still have access to that summon going forward. Best of both worlds the way I see it. But yes, Weiss summons her knight, kills the Nevermore, and slows the crash of the plane. Unfortunately, the damage the airship has taken, combined with the force of the glyphs, begin to tear the hull apart. As they reach her last glyph, Weiss is flung out the back by an unrestrained box of dust and knocked out. When she comes to, she's floating in a shallow pool of water staring at the sky. This is where we get the bandits finding her and Raven knocking her out, ending the episode. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it now for the first installment of Fixing RWBY Volume 5. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell, so you'll be notified of all future uploads, including the rest of Volume 5, which I promise you is going to get pretty damn crazy. That all said, if you had something that you liked about this video in particular, or something that you didn't like in particular, please let me know in the comments down below. Following the release of the rest of the volume, there's going to be a stream where I take the most serious and intense criticisms of the volume and address them to you directly. Whether it be admitting a mistake that I made, which is very possible, it's a very long script, or defending my choices because it would have actually been shown better in an actual video series as opposed to a scripted format like this. Whatever it be, please leave it in the comments down below, I'll be happy to address them in the future. And finally, if you want to support my channel, please go over to my Patreon and consider donating. That's all I have for you now, I'll catch you all on the flip side.